All right, we're back once again with Chasing Frets. My name is Jason Shadrick, and I'm here with Joe Gore.
Hi, Jason. Hi, listeners. Really stoked about talking to my old friend, Will Bernard.
Yeah, and it's been such a treat to have Will on this week and go down a bunch of different pathways. And today we're going to talk about kind of his approach to rhythm guitar and kind of more specifically kind of the New Orleans influence, because as we mentioned before, he plays in this really great trio with legendary New Orleans drummer Stanton Moore.
Yeah, Will's originally a San Francisco Bay Area guy like I am. He's been in Brooklyn at the epicenter of the New York City jazz scene for years and years now. But he also has a very special connection with New Orleans. And, beside playing with Stanton Moore, who, as Jason previously pointed out, is perhaps more than anyone else really carrying the torch for the traditions of New Orleans rhythms at the moment. He knew Dr. John a bit too, and he talks about that. So he speaks with some authority. What interests me about this is that Will's a brainy guitar player. He has a very has a university music education. He reads like nobody's business, and is the kind of guy who isn't theoretical command of what he's doing every time he picks up the instrument. Yet at the same time, he's just really funky. There's nothing stiff or academic about what he does, and that juxtaposition of like earthiness and brains is one of the things I love most about what Will does.
Yeah, and you can hear that on his latest record. It's called Freelance Subversives. It's available now, and it's a really kind of hip, funky, soulful band record. The ensemble's bigger than a trio. It could be like quartet or quintet or something, but a bunch of just super cool tunes. It's even fun I was playing along with it the other day. So we're gonna get to it. Here's our final episode with Will Bernard, and we're gonna talk all about rhythm guitar and New Orleans rhythm. And again, to round out this week, Will Bernard, all the way from Brooklyn, New York. How you doing, Will?
Pretty good. Hanging in there.
So this topic I'm really interested in hearing, because probably other than maybe the TJ Kirk stuff, the first time I really came across and really started to check out your playing was the stuff with Stanton Moore and his trio. And Stanton Moore seems like the modern mayor of New Orleans style drumming. And I wanted to really kind of get your perspective and view on the kind of the specific type of rhythm guitar that kind of happens in New Orleans. And I know I'd asked you before, you never really lived there, but you spent quite a bit of time there.
Yeah.
And what was kind of your entry into that kind of funky New Orleans sound in that scene?
Growing up, I think I love everything New Orleans, even though I didn't have it wasn't like I wanted to go, I had learn it, it wasn't something on my agenda to go do as a big important part of my work. But, later when discovering the meters, really getting into the meters, like in the 90s, when I was playing a lot of more funk, a lot of funk type of situations, getting to go see them. And, the meters, Dr. John and like the Wild Chapatulas and some of the Indian groups were my first real entry to that. So when I heard Stanton play, I felt, first time I heard him, it was with the trio with Charlie Hunter and Skerrick at the Great American Music Hall. It was Stanton's first record, which I really thought was a great record. And so there was a point, I think I sat in with Galactic at a festival because he knew about TJ Kirk, and we sort of started becoming friends then, and went up to New Orleans. We had a put together band called the Frequinox, which was Robert Walter from 20th Congress and some of the Galactic guys and Donald Harrison, New Orleans saxophone player. And then the trio came out of that. When we started doing the trio, Stanton pointed me in a lot of directions to check out in terms of New Orleans music and, those guys, the Galactic guys. And I learned a lot from actually Stanton's first instructional video. I learned a lot from that, about different types of claves used. And
he seems like such an encyclopedia of that stuff. He can get real technical and break it down if you need to. But he seems like a real historian of that style.
Yeah, he really he can go into great detail about everything, New Orleans, and give you examples. Yeah, he's a clinician, so he's got that kind of brain. So, I would branch out, and one of the people some of the other, I think I learned a lot from drummers more than guitar players, because I think New Orleans is more of a drummer, piano, brass kind of a town, traditionally. So check out a lot of drummers. I did a piece for Premier Guitar a long time ago, I think, where I took apart a Clyde Stubblefield beat and made different little guitar riffs out of it. So that's kind of how I think about drummers, like relating to a guitar, where you have the low, medium, and high part of the drum set, and then you have the low, medium, high of the guitar. You can think about how the high strings go with a hi-hat, and middle chords go more maybe with a snare, and then lower the bass drum.
Are you talking about like playing with rhythmic polyphony and doing all those parts at once, or do you mean drawing from each of those three sources at various times?
Both, really, but the main point is to do one at a time. Like if I was playing with a drummer, I might focus into hi-hats, and lock up with a hi-hat pattern. That's a common thing for me to try to do, hi-hat and snare. There's a project I've been wanting to do more, is to just transcribe drum parts and then make guitar music out of it in the way I did for that article. In terms of polyphony, one thing that really struck me was years ago I did an interview with Leo Nocentelli, and first thing he said was, ask me about my layering technique.
Explain.
I said, so Leo, tell me about your layering technique. And then so he demonstrated Just Kiss My Baby, I think it was, meter song, where you have you can go check it out, but he has a high part, and then doubles the bass. So he's kind of playing the two parts, and then he'll kind of fill in the middle. So it's kind of that what I'm talking about, and it's not exactly polyphonic, but it's kind of like maybe that way Bach would think about having different lines happening at the same time in different registers.
You mentioned, and it's true that looking at the 400-year history of New Orleans music, it is more of a horn, drums, and keyboard type of town. But to whatever extent there is a New Orleans guitar sound, it's obviously largely defined by Leo. And one interesting thing about his playing, especially for someone like you who is a adventurous soloist, is his sound is so overwhelmingly dry and staccato. And there's the occasional solo, but if you think of the Leo thing, it's all very, very clipped and ultra staccato and kind of hi-hat like. And it's not really a horn or vocal sort of voice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. I think nowadays he plays a lot more blistering solos, but going back to the original meter stuff, it was definitely more like a rhythmic concept.
And just like you were saying, how you're breaking apart those drum beats to make guitar parts, you go back and hear that "Just Kiss My Baby" part. You can just on the guitar part, you can hear just like you were saying, how he's kind of mimicking all the different parts of the drum set. So if you were to just solo that guitar part, you could hear him bouncing back and forth between different registers, just like a drummer would.
Yeah. Well, a more famous meters example, like "Look a Pie Pie," is the riff is, and it's a stellar example of what Will's talking about, except just within the course of two bars, he's sort of got he's juggling three registers at once.
Mm-hmm. Well, the whole big part of the sound of the meters was that doubling the bass technique that they did that made it sound so fat, and I think may have influenced a lot of reggae musicians, you know.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Um,
I mean, the moral of the story is just listen to the meters as much as possible.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of lesser known guitar players from New Orleans that have made impacts, you know, like Snooks Eaglin and Danny Barker and people like that.
And of course, Dr. John started out as a guitar player.
Right. And he mentioned it. I'm ashamed I don't remember his name, but when I got to hang out with Dr. John a lot, actually, and play with him a few times. But I had lots of long conversations with him. And there was a guitar player, he said, who was his favorite, whose name like escapes me now, but I think he plays on.
Did he mention any records that?
It might have been the guy on Gumbo. And I had a long conversation with Kirk Joseph actually last night, who I play. He's a sousaphone player from the Dirty Dozen brass band who I play with in a Mad Skillet. And I told him I was doing this interview, and he pulled some names out of the hat that I didn't know. Mostly not well known, you know. In the one of the guys that
was it Alvin Robinson?
Yeah, I think that might. Yeah, I think that's what it was. Just looked it up. Yeah, Alvin Robinson was. He was my favorite guitar player. Too bad he had to go die on me. One of the guys I love that people don't know that much is Lonnie Johnson, who's an incredible guitar player who played. And I believe he's actually from New Orleans originally, but he moved to Chicago and various places. Ended up playing on a Duke Ellington song, "The Mooch." It also became and his early stuff is more blues, almost ragtimey, like incredible Blind Blake kind of finger picking stuff.
But he was also one of the first people to play, you know, to record a guitar solo.
Yeah,
a single note solo on records, you know, predating Charlie Christian. Yeah,
that's right. And then he later became more of a blues guy, but I kind of think of him as a New Orleans guy. You know? And of course, there's all the banjo players, like that played with Louis Armstrong and Andrew St. Cyr. So that's a thing to listen to, you know, banjo players.
I wonder if there's a connection between like the Leo approach, you know, the ultra staccato, you know, all attack, no sustain, and banjo. Never occurred to me before, but it's his on a lot of the famous meter tracks, not the blistering solos you mentioned. It is kind of a banjo-like envelope, isn't it? You know, super bright, completely definitive attack, almost instant decay.
Yeah, it's true. I hadn't thought of that either. That makes sense, though. And, you know, like those kind of guitar players that played four-string guitar and banjo, that played sort of those block chord solos, and that was, I'm sure, there's a lineage to that because he plays a lot of little block chord-y kind of riffs, you know, with chords.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Well, thank you so much, Will, for hanging out with us all week long. I learned a whole bunch.
Me too. No, I've got my listening list over here. I've been writing down stuff I have to check out. Will's kind of an encyclopedia about cool under the radar music.
As you guys are too.
So make sure to go check out Will's latest record, Freelance Subversive, anywhere you get recorded music. Thanks again, Will.
Yeah, thanks so much, guys.
Thanks again, Joe. And until we'll see you next week.